An economic boost and a showcase for British engineering. Those were the goals of the UK's second high-speed rail project, HS2. Instead, it's become a symbol of governmental waste and bureaucracy. What does that say of the country's future infrastructure ambitions? Welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the UK was once a trailblazer when it came to railways. The first underground metro line opened in 1863. But its biggest project in decades has itself become a train wreck. What's gone so wrong?
London to Paris in 2.25 hours flat, travelling at 480 kilometres an hour. This is HS2, a high-speed train between the UK and continental Europe, an unmitigated success. Unfortunately, HS2, a project that planned to link London in the south with the economically disadvantaged north of England, has been plagued by a catalogue of delays and overspends. Originally slated to reach Leeds and Manchester via Birmingham, the Leeds leg was cancelled in 2021. Recently, the Birmingham to Manchester section was also scrapped.
HS2 is the ultimate example of the old consensus. The result is a project whose costs have more than doubled, which has been repeatedly delayed, and it is not scheduled to reach here in Manchester for almost 2 decades.
The project's initial budget in 2010 was $40 billion. Those costs have spiraled upward. The 2019 government figures show $86 billion needed to finish it, though most estimates are well over $100 billion. So far, $30 billion has been spent, and now the train line will only run from Birmingham to London.
And this too is controversial because there isn't enough money to fund the final leg between Old Oak Common at 10 kilometres away and here at London Euston. It's hoped private equity will make up the shortfall. But even then, HS2's final destination likely won't be central London until at least 2040.
Looking at comparable projects between France and the UK, it costs up to 10 times more to build in Britain than the French equivalent. Red tape and local objections have largely been blamed for the elevated price tag. Whatever can be salvaged from HS2, it's unclear if the UK's reputational damage can recover.
Earlier, I caught up with Sir Alan Duncan, a former UK foreign minister. He says the HS2 project is ripe for trimming down.
I think what this whole issue needed, and I think it's what the Prime Minister's done, is a very good forensic assessment of what is value for money and what is not. And I think that the cost overruns were so massive, the question had to be asked, can we really justify 100 billion, or would it be better to chop off 20 billion and stick it around in other infrastructure projects? And I think probably it's better to do the latter.
Let's meet our guests. In Manchester in the UK, Nuno Gil, Professor of New Infrastructure Development at the Alliance Manchester Business School. In Warwickshire is Michael Byng, Chartered Quantity Surveyor at MBPC Infrastructure, a construction cost management company. And joining me in the studio is Christian Wolmar, a railway historian, writer and broadcaster, and Scarlett Mccgwire, former advisor to the UK's opposition Labour Party. Michael, I want to come to you first. You worked on this project. Give us the inside track, no pun intended. What went wrong?
It was basically put together very, very badly. The scheme itself connected to nowhere. It didn't connect to any parts of the railway system in London, Birmingham, Manchester or Leeds. The route, when chosen, wasn't properly surveyed, and the estimate of cost and the time to complete was never properly calculated and determined before the hybrid bill went to Parliament for phase 1 in 2017. And those problems have carried on with phase 2A, 2B East and 2B West since. With the result, you've had horrendous cost escalation and time escalation, together with the discovery or the revelation of virtually insurmountable construction problems that have caused this project to effectively be cancelled.
Nuno, let's talk about the optics of all of this. How bad does it look for the United Kingdom that a big massive infrastructure project like this, a flagship invention of the government, can't get over the line?
Yeah, I suppose it's an opportunity to think about how democracies, liberal democracies, can go on about doing big infrastructure. It seems that the old game that has been played for decades is no longer working, and we really need to change the rules of the game. I don't have a problem with the fact that the costs have been going up. I think I would have a problem if the costs have not been going up, because the way the rules of the game are designed basically means that you have to start with an abstraction that can be measured in order to fit a cost-benefit analysis. So that means there's a lot of things that you are going to exclude. And as you negotiate the project with society, you realize that the project that you can approve on paper is not the project that you are going to build. You are going to have to negotiate a lot of compromises, and the scope of this project is going to evolve organically, and inevitably the costs are going to go up until you find that landing zone where society is going to allow you to get on with this project. So cost escalation is not a bad thing. It's an outcome of a democratic process of decision making.
But Nuno, let's look at the money here. I mean, they were started out, 32.7 billion was the initial projected figure. And spoof forward a few years and 32 billion has turned into 100 billion. I mean, the figures just ran away from people. What were they actually doing?
Yeah, well, you have to be careful there, because you have to compare oranges with oranges. So I don't think you are comparing it's not fair to compare 32 billion in 2012 prices with 100 billion in 2023 prices. So, but apart from that, what you have to think is that when you price what you priced in 2012, the 32 billion, is not the project that you are able to build, right? It is because you don't approve a project, you approve a representation of a project. And at that point, you are extremely constrained by cost-benefit analysis, which basically only takes into consideration the user willingness to pay. So basically, what you approve, the 32 billion, is almost like if you are going to build this project in the desert. And if you are going to build it in the desert, it is going to have some benefits and some costs. But then, as you start to negotiate the project, the representation, the idea with society, you realize that you have to make your stakeholders want to appropriate value. So I give you an example here from Manchester. No? So what London proposed was to build a very utilitarian station in Salford near the BBC studios. And what Manchester local authorities said is, by the way, what we want is a grandiose station, not a utilitarian one, near Manchester Piccadilly, which is going to cost way more. We want a second station by the airport, and we want a very long tunnel that connects almost the station at the airport to the Manchester Piccadilly station in order to protect the welfare of the local communities. So this type of negotiation evolves organically as you start talking with your stakeholders, as you understand their preoccupations in terms of how this project can create social welfare, other externalities, and that inevitably means that costs are going up. But you can't even start this negotiation until you have an initial starting point, which is just an abstraction, which is not the thing that is going to be built.
Thanks, Nuno. Scarlett, I want to come to you. I read someone recently respected in the rail industry, and they said that there was no political champion for this. There was no leader driving it over the line in Parliament. Do you think that was what was needed, maybe?
Yeah, I certainly think so. This began as a Labour idea. Then they lost the election. The Tories took it on, began to change it because it was going to go straight through the Tory heartlands in the Cotswolds.
And they didn't want that.
And so they then started the tunnels. We're not even talking about Manchester. So the costs then went up. There were massive, massive protests against it. And so, and you're right, and it sort of went on without a champion. And then suddenly, now, having spent an awful lot of money on it, promised the North that this was all about levelling up, they say no to the North and make it impossible. Because what Labour had said was, if you stop it, we're going to start it again. we do believe in HS2. It was our
So hang
idea.
on, are you saying that if there's a Labour government in the UK next year, Keir Starmer as Prime Minister will just turn around on this?
No, not anymore, because actually the way they've stopped it has made it impossible for anybody to go on.
Has that been done deliberately?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no question that what Rishi Sunak did is he took the money and he says he's going to spend it on northern infrastructure, rails, buses. I mean, actually, a lot of roads, frankly, when it should be public transport. No, there's no question that it is now impossible to go beyond Birmingham
it's dead.
It is dead in the water.
Christian, all these railway managers and senior leaders, in inverted commas, I mean, they've behaved like children with a golden credit card here, haven't they?
I think that's a little bit unfair. I think Nuno has made a very good point that what they do to get a project like this approved by the politicians is to basically give a cost estimate that is far below reality. And then you get all these extra bits thrown in. But I think the fundamental flaw with this scheme is the one that Michael Byng highlighted, was that it was a rather unnecessary railway. We have actually in this country very good services to Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham from London. You know, less than 2 hours, or around 2 hours for all of those journeys. We didn't really need a massive high-speed addition to that. What we needed actually was a railway that transported freight, and it would have been much better if that had been the original concept.
Well, here is Manchester's Mayor Andy Burnham talking about the Birmingham to Manchester leg being scrapped.
It's just not right, it's not fair, not disrespectful to us, but to the people of the north of England, wherever they are on HS2. I think there'll be a consensus across the north of England that this is no way at all to treat this part of the world, given the promises that they've made.
Nuno, I want to ask you about other countries in Europe and how they do it. So I read a statistic here. Other countries, the average in Europe per kilometre of high-speed rail network is £32 million. In the UK, per kilometre, £250 million. I mean, it's almost, what's that? Almost 8 times the cost of what they do in continental Europe. How can they get it so badly wrong in the UK?
Yeah, well, it's not it's not a question of badly wrong, right? It's the UK is not France, the UK is not Spain. So these are fundamentally different institutional environments. So the way these projects happen cannot be compared. Now, so in the UK, you have a first past the post system, a political system, which basically means empowers a lot more local authorities, local communities, local MPs to negotiate, gives them more bargaining power when it comes to negotiate this type of large infrastructure projects. You don't have that sort of political regime in France, in Spain, where it is more centralized. So it's just, you have in the UK this system with the hybrid bill. So basically the government didn't have powers to expropriate. So you have to ask that power from Parliament. That would not necessarily be the case in other countries where probably the constitution gives governments automatically the power to expropriate. So you just can't compare different countries that are so fundamentally different from an institutional perspective, and then compare prices in terms of building this type of infrastructure. It costs what it costs in the UK. I suppose you have a massive problem in the UK because you also have a number of watchdogs and the whole ecosystem of consultants that have for years created a narrative, a very powerful narrative, that a good project is one that is on time, on budget. And that just complicates things so much because there's so much money now going into indirect costs, which excludes the design. If you think about the costs, the indirect costs of Crossrail, of London Olympics, and SP2 would be not that different. We are talking almost of 20% of the budget is going into consultants and governance and control. It's not going into design. It's not going into physical works. And the reason for that is all these industrial institutional environment that has been created. It is almost toxic and claustrophobic, that says, well, if the project is not on time, is not doing well. If the project is not within budget, is not not doing well, and so you bring more controllers, you bring more watchdogs, and all those layers and layers of and scrutiny and governance that adds money and adds time and that's less bureaucracy, and that is something that is a challenge that the UK faces, because we really need to educate society about how these big projects work and remove the expectation that from day one you actually know how much it's going to cost, because the reality is there's no one today has the knowledge, and we don't have the tools. Artificial intelligence may help in the future, but right now we don't have tools to tell you today, if I want to build a railway in the UK, how much this is going to cost, because we don't know the cost of encouraging all these stakeholders in society to collaborate, and more so as politics become more polarized, as you have climate change, as you have other external shocks, you have biodiversity concerns, you have social inequality. These projects are becoming increasingly defined by the grand challenges of the world today.
Let's
and
bring
you
in
just
Christian.
don't know that,
Christian,
how much it's going to cost.
On time, on budget. It's not too much to ask, is it?
Well, I think it is. I think some of the points that Nuno makes are accurate. I still think that we shouldn't excuse what has happened with this. This project has suffered right from the beginning with the fact that it's never been under any control. It's just gone completely wild, that it's had this company, HS2 Limited, which was separate from the government, that ministers, I think partly because it was a Labour project that was then taken over by Tories, I think ministers have not kept an eye on it. There hasn't been anybody actually saying why we're doing the project and why we're pushing it forward. But there are also some inexcusable cost increases, which I think Nuno has a bit minimised. I think that because the project management has been so poor, and we've always kind of rather gold-plated these things. So we always kind of add in costs. I'll just give you a very quick example, which is that the contractors were asked to specify a line that would be safe for everything for 150 years, from environmental degradation or whatever. And it was supposed to survive 150 years. Of course, that pushed up the cost of the contracts enormously. They didn't need to do that. They should have just said, okay, we'll take the risk of if something terrible happens in the next 150 years. You don't try and contract it out. So there's all those sort of examples where they've allowed costs to escalate.
Scarlett, politically, do you think this has in any way damaged Sunak, or is it something that the British public in the home counties where his party is mostly supported, that he made that calculation and thought, let's just bin off the North?
Well, certainly there's an incredible problem in the North, as Andy Burnham has shown. And the North feels that in 2019 they voted for levelling up, they voted for Boris Johnson, and they've now got Rishi Sunak, who's doing nothing for them. But we have to remember that HS2 goes through the home counties, and there has been hell to pay, right? And they are not happy about it. It's been through some of those beautiful places in southern England, and it's wrecked them. Let alone, trying to come down into North London, although now it appears to be in West London. I mean, that's the other thing, is people are looking at it and going, but we can't even use it. I mean, it's useless for us. It goes from somewhere in West London to somewhere in Birmingham. It doesn't go to proper stations.
And this British government, they've actually got a levelling up minister. I mean, what does that person do? What does it tell you about the disparity?
I mean, you just ask, what does this government do? I mean, they've had years to level up and they have done nothing.
No, this is just shambolic, isn't it?
It's more complicated than that, right? Because what we have is, in order for these projects to get off the ground, you need to meet these measures. You have to meet these criteria, value for money criteria, which is basically a fraction, benefits over cost. The problem is what we measure from a benefits perspective is very narrow. So if you start and basically it's about economic returns and some wider economic benefits, then everything else that we struggle to measure in money terms, it's not going there into the value for money. So because we exclude so many benefits that are captured by non-users, we also create an environment where the people that are putting together these cost forecasts are have an incentive and indeed don't have an alternative, but to exclude a lot of other costs that need to be incurred, because otherwise the project does not look on paper value for money. So we have created this poisonous environment where people don't have an alternative but to look very narrow to the costs, because also the system is looking very narrow to the benefits. But by the way, this stuff is not new. If you think about Crossrail, it was approved in 2008 with a budget of 15 billion, but that of those 15 billion, 5 billion was a massive contingency that they said we are not going to touch it. And in 2023, when the project opened, actually it ended up costing 19 billion. So it's just the way it's just a game. The rules of the game are not the ones that we would like them to be. So until we change the rules of the game, things are not going to change that much.
A very expensive game where the British taxpayer has lost badly through no fault of their own. Christian, you're passionate about rail. Tell me, you travel a lot. Surely the bigger issue here is the state of Britain's rail network and the cost to use it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Nuno makes a very good point that we don't actually value the railways properly. We actually say, oh, it costs money to subsidise it and so on, when in fact the benefits it brings to people across the country, both in economic terms, in reducing congestion, in environmental terms, are absolutely enormous, and we never count those. So we say, oh, well, and other countries make this same mistake actually. They say, oh, the railways cost a lot of money, we could spend this money on schools, on hospitals, but the railways shouldn't be expected to pay their way. They should be subsidised in the same way that roads are subsidised, the army is subsidised, and so on.
Scarlett, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely right. I was really shocked that Grant Shapps, who used to be the Transport Minister, who should have been the champion for HS2, and he said when they decided to dump it, well, really, nobody travels on trains anymore. Clearly, he doesn't. I do. I mean, I have been on crowded trains for the last 2 or 3 weeks. There is no question. The British public travel by train, and we need to encourage it. And what is so appalling is the northern infrastructure. I mean, it's fine if you need to get anywhere to London. But once you're in the north and you want to go, Leeds, Cross Pennine or anything like that, let alone trying to get to work from outside Manchester or outside, it is appalling. And that's where we should be spending serious money. And we do need a railway champion in the government.
Just tell me, politically next year, UK general election, last time round, a lot of Labour voters in the north of England turned their back on the Labour Party and voted Conservative. What do you think? What's your prediction for next year?
Well, it's going to completely change. I mean, if you look at the polls, I mean, the latest poll that came out this morning said that up north, I mean, the Tories will be lucky to keep any seats at all. They're certainly going to lose what we call the red wall, which went blue, went Tory, and it's going to go back. And it's actually because these people believed in promises that things would change. They believed that Brexit would bring them back the factories that had closed, the other things. No, I mean, Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, never had a plan. He never had a clue.
That's not like him.
No, not like him at all. Not like him to tell porkies. And people are really, really disappointed. And what's so terrible is they lose their faith in politics. And as Nuno says, we want a good liberal democracy with the people in charge.
Back to trains. My final question goes to you, Christian. I mean, the irony here is that Britain was the country that gave the world Isambard Kingdom Brunel.
No, even before that, 1830, Liverpool to Manchester, the world's first railway.
I bow to your knowledge, sir. But the irony is that people across Europe, across the world, will be looking at this project and just laughing, knowing that what British engineers did in railway set standards.
I think this is a terrible hit to Britain's prestige in the world, actually. I think this is a source of great embarrassment. We've ended up with a 130-mile railway that goes between Acton and Aston, which Acton is a suburb of London and Aston is a suburb of Birmingham. Nobody much is going to use it. It's not even going to come into central London. It's a fantastic embarrassment when you look at the TGV in France, you look at the AVE in Spain, you look at the Trenitalia's kind of 2 different networks of high-speed lines. It's just an embarrassment to the country that invented the railways.
And just tell me now, who benefited from it? I'm guessing some people have made an awful lot of cash.
There's a lot of contractors who've done very well. I've never quite understood why the Conservative Party supported this, apart from the fact that they have a lot of friends among the contractors who actually give them healthy, generous payments to help their election campaigns. And I somewhat suspect that's why the Tories kept going with this project until now.
Scarlett, what do you think?
I think he's right. I mean, I think it's a disgrace and an embarrassment, and it's terrible that here we are, Britain. We've invested billions into something that is barely going to happen, and it's taken up. Yeah, I mean, it is just absolutely awful, and it's 13 years of waste.
Scarlett and all our panel, thank you. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.